What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christoforou with the Duran, and I have with me Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. And today we're going to be looking at escalating tensions between Hungary and Ukraine. So, Alexander, we have a news story that's really not getting much light of day, and you'll probably be able to explain why it's not getting much light of day, because anything about Ukraine and what's going on, the bad stuff that's going on in Ukraine, gets suppressed pretty much from all mainstream media. But this is a story about Ukraine and its tensions not with Russia, but with a European Union country, and that country is Hungary. And of course, Hungary is getting a lot of blowback from the mainstream media and a lot of bad press because of Viktor Orban and Viktor Orban's defiance of the Brussels oligarchs and technocrats and the rulers of Europe. And Viktor Orban definitely is leading the charge to move into another direction, take Europe into a different direction. And it is resonating. Viktor Orban's message is resonating. What is the conflict now that is brewing between Hungary and Ukraine, and what does it mean for the European Union? What does it mean for Ukraine, for Russia, for the US?
Yeah, first of all, let's just explain the background to this conflict. I mean, when in 2014 the present government of Ukraine gained power through an unconstitutional and violent coup. I think we need to say that clearly, because that is an essential point to make. It came in with a political agenda, which is basically to Ukrainianize Ukraine. Now, that may sound a strange thing to say, but of course, Ukraine is an amalgam of different regions. Around half of Ukrainians speak Russian as their first language, and there are very significant minorities of speaking different languages in Ukraine also, including a very significant Hungarian minority. Now, part of this agenda of Ukrainianizing Ukraine involves enforcing the Ukrainian language on the entire population. Now, directly after the coup, the Ukrainian government purported to cancel a law that had been passed by the previous Ukrainian government, giving Russian a certain measure of legal recognition. And the European Union put pressure on Ukraine to reverse that law, and under that pressure, they did reverse that law. I mean, the law that abolished the previous law, which said, that Russian had a legal status. But as I said, after they purported to abolish that law, the European Union told them to sort of reverse it. Now they are pushing forward again. They're once again trying to enforce Ukrainian on everybody in Ukraine. Now, this violates human rights as set out in the European fundamental charters. And Hungary, which is a European Union country, has challenged this and has complained about this. And it has made very clear that whilst Ukraine continues on its present course, Hungary will oppose any move to admit Ukraine either into the European Union or into NATO. So this has set the scene for a clash between Ukraine and Hungary. And of course, it has also led to Ukraine expelling the Hungarian consul from a certain region of Ukraine. The European Union and NATO, which have been backing Ukraine to the hilt in its conflict with Russia and with the Russian-speaking people of eastern Ukraine who are in rebellion against the government there, they, of course, have had absolutely nothing to say about this story, and you will not see any coverage of it in the Western media, even though it's a big story in Ukraine and, of course, in Hungary as well.
Now, a lot of this came to a head in the Transcarpathian region.
That's right.
In West Ukraine, in the town of small town in Berehove, if I'm not mistaken. And that is predominantly Hungarian, that region. What happened in Berehove? Because they speak Hungarian. They had, I think, a Hungarian opera or Hungarian music company came, and they were given passports and stuff like that was going on. And I mean, explain to our viewers what really set the spark to this fire that's going on between the two countries.
Well, as I said, we must always understand that there is this underlying agenda by the Ukrainian regime to try and Ukrainianize Ukraine, and it is very hostile to non-Ukrainian minorities and to people in Ukraine who insist on asserting their own independent identities. But there is another further factor, which is a very important political factor, which is, of course, that Ukraine is, as I said, something of a hodgepodge of different regions which were put together by the Soviet Union when Ukraine was perceived less as a country and more as an administrative region of the former Soviet Union. And that has made the Ukrainian authorities extremely sensitive to what they see as moves towards secessionism or separatism, as they always refer to it, in particular regions like Transcarpathia, like, of course, the eastern Ukraine, and amongst the Rusin people, who are a more Russian-speaking people, also in Western Ukraine. So you had all these extraordinary statements coming out of Kiev about basically claiming that the Hungarian minority were being disloyal and were being egged on by Hungary with a view to secession from Ukraine. And that seems to have led to this actually really rather sharp crackdown on the Hungarian people of Transcarpathia, and that is why you see this reaction from Hungary. So it is actually quite a serious crisis, and the Ukrainians responded to it not just by, as I said, restricting the rights of these people, but by moving troops there and onto the border with Hungary, with this sort of implication that there was a military threat to Ukraine from Hungary. And of course, by doing that, the Ukrainians, in a sense, were making a threat of their own against Hungary, which forced Hungary to react. So it shows to my mind how extreme and irrational the Ukrainian authorities have become, and how insecure about the internal situation in Ukraine they now feel.
So you mentioned that there are forces that push Ukraine to do these types of things. And my question to you is who do you think, or what do you think are those forces that are pushing the Ukraine to take on a European, in this case, a European Union country like Hungary? And it seems very convenient that the Ukraine is being pushed to do this, because to me it seems like it plays into the neoliberal mainstream media narrative that Orban is a nationalist and that Orban wants to reinstate the glory of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he wants to reclaim that land in Transcarpathia. It seems to me like this narrative that Ukraine is trying to push out, that this region in Transcarpathia and Berehove is looking to secede, and these residents, this small villages, is looking to become part of Hungary, plays into the narrative that Orban is this nationalist leader that wants to, reinstate the glory of Hungary.
I think you're absolutely right about that, and I think it actually goes a bit further than this, because, of course, Orban is not only being branded by the neoliberal order as the threat to the neoliberal order, as this nationalist bogey figure within the European Union. But of course, he is also the person who is seen as the leader of the pro-Russians within the European Union. And one of the basic narratives that we've been hearing about Ukraine over the last 4 years, ever since the Maidan coup in 2014, is that Ukraine is this supposed victim of Russian aggression. This has been the sort of entire narrative. And now one can so easily see the next stage in the narrative, which is that evil Orban is now supposedly ganging up with the bad Russians against Russia's prime victim, which is Ukraine, which shows supposedly what a disloyal and pro-Russian person Orban is. One can see so easily how this narrative could be created and how easily it might gain traction with some people. So I'm afraid it isn't just a question of criticising Orban, but as I said, it has a rather sinister aspect. As to who is encouraging it, well, the United States is encouraging it, rather the deep state in the United States is encouraging it. I mean, there have been recently arms deliveries to Ukraine, there's been political support for Ukraine, there's been more talk about sanctions against Russia to support Ukraine. But of course, there are also forces within the European Union who are encouraging it as well, partly because they want to support Ukraine, but partly because they want to use the crisis in Ukraine to discredit Orban.
Would you say this is a red flag for Orban, that he needs to watch his back? Because the European Union and the US is really coming after him now, and they're using Ukraine. Once again, they're using Ukraine in order to achieve their goals, which may be to dislodge Orban from power, because he is a thorn in the European side. And like we said before, he's gaining a lot of traction and he has a lot of support, not only from Hungary, but we've talked about it in previous videos, Austria, Italy. I mean, this guy is the leader of, the resistance to the EU's open borders, open migration, all of the EU's policies. This is the guy that's leading the charge against it.
I think he absolutely does need to watch his back, and I think this is very much a red flag to him. But I'm going to say something about Orban. He is a very, very skilled politician, and his support for him in Hungary appears to be solid. And I am sure that on an issue like this, where the rights of Hungarian people are involved, it will be more solid still. It will actually strengthen support for him. And I'm going to say something else. I think if we look more broadly at feeling within Europe, more and more people in Europe, especially in countries like Italy, in Greece, in all sorts of other places, are becoming extremely exasperated with this whole Ukrainian story. I mean, the sense that Ukraine and the conflict there is being used to mobilize support for Angela Merkel and for neoliberal policies in Europe and hostility to Russia, and that it is being manipulated in the way that we've just discussed to attack people like Orban, is something an awful lot of people are going to see. So yes, Orban needs to be careful, but I think he has an awful lot of support in this conflict as well. And I think that the people who are trying to use Ukraine against him need to understand, or need to think about carefully, is that if they overplay their hand, it could actually go the other way. It could actually crystallize opposition within the European Union to the entire Ukrainian policy that the European Union has been following since 2014 and even before.
Do you think this is going to backfire on Ukraine? I mean, it seems to me that Ukraine is now biting off way too much than it can chew. I mean, taking on Russia was already a monumental mistake and a monumental task, but now going after Hungary in the West just seems to me like it's a recipe for disaster for Ukraine.
Well, it is, but the trouble with Ukraine is that policy there has not been very rational for a very long time. I mean, if you follow Ukrainian political debates and you follow the kind of things that Ukrainian politicians say, it has a kind of fantastic quality, and I mean it is becoming ever more detached from reality ever more. So yes, Ukraine is now quarrelling with Hungary. It's, as you correctly said, it's quarreled with Russia. It appears to be having all kinds of issues with either minorities within Ukraine also. And we have a very complicated election season coming up there next year, with a strong possibility that President Poroshenko will lose. But as I said, we cannot expect any rational decision making to come out of Kiev. It hasn't been coming out of Kiev for a very long time. And given that it is so irrational, it is very irresponsible of governments like those of the US and of Germany and of other countries to go on supporting it in the way they have been doing. What the Ukrainians need to do is to have somebody from Germany or the US come to Kiev and say, look, you've just got to stop. This just isn't going anywhere. And you've got to stop behaving like this. And if you don't, you're going to lose support. But nobody in the West, in Germany and the United States, to be more precise, nobody in those countries up to now has shown the willingness to do that.
I mean, Donald Trump showed a little bit of it during the campaign, but I mean, I think he's just kind of forgotten about Ukraine altogether, and he was looking at Ukraine more as the country that was working with Hillary Clinton, that was behind Hillary Clinton, and I think that drew his disdain for Poroshenko in Ukraine. But it seems to me that the United States now is back in the unconditional support for Ukraine, no matter, what they do.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think Donald Trump doesn't give a fig about Ukraine. I think he doesn't care about it. I think, as far as he's concerned, it's a country which has brought him nothing but trouble, but he's not interested in it. But the deep state, I use that word all the time about the United States because it certainly exists. The deep state is very committed to its Ukrainian policy. And what has effectively happened is that Donald Trump, with all his many political problems, has basically left Ukrainian policy to them. And as we see, they're just continuing with it in exactly the same way that they were continuing with it under the Obama administration and before.
Right. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, thank you very much for an interesting analysis on the dispute between Hungary and Ukraine. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And remember to visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, help support the Duran, and in the description box down below, you will find links to our Patreon and PayPal pages. Please donate to us. It really helps us create videos like this for you. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you once again. Until next time, take care.